Okay, so you're interested in the Canadian housing market, maybe even thinking of buying a place someday. Well, get this. The Canadian government just announced what they're calling the boldest mortgage reforms in decades. And we're diving deep into exactly what that means for you.
That's right. We've got a government document here outlining some really big changes to the rules around mortgages. The government is connecting these changes to a larger plan that aims to make housing more affordable. And they've set this pretty ambitious goal of building 4 million new homes.
4 million new homes, that's a lot. But building new houses takes time. What about right now? What can people expect to change in the near future?
One major change coming down the pipeline is that 30-year amortizations are being expanded for insured mortgages.
Hold on a sec. For those of us who don't speak mortgage jargon every day, can we break down what amortization even means?
Of course, amortization is basically the length of time you have to pay back your mortgage. A longer amortization period like this means your monthly payments will be lower, which could make it easier to manage the cost of your home.
So does this mean everyone in Canada can suddenly get a 30-year mortgage?
Not exactly. This expansion specifically applies to first-time homebuyers and anyone buying a newly built home.
So if you're thinking of buying your first place, this could be a game changer for you. Lower monthly payments might bring that dream home within reach, but what exactly is a first-time home buyer?
Good question. The government document lays out some specific criteria. You qualify as a first-time homebuyer if you've never purchased a home before, if you haven't lived in a home you owned in the past 4 years, or if you've recently gone through a relationship breakdown.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about the newly built home part? Does that include condos?
It does. To be considered newly constructed, a home must never have been lived in before. That includes condos, even if they went through that interim occupancy period before being officially sold.
Oh, that's good to know. Because interim occupancy can sometimes be a bit confusing. But it's good to see those buying brand new condos aren't being left out of these changes.
Exactly. It seems like they're really trying to make sure those specific groups can benefit.
All right, so longer amortization periods for first-time buyers and people looking at new builds. What else is changing?
The price cap for insured mortgages is getting a big boost, up to $1.5 million from the previous $1 million.
Wow, that's a big jump. But what does that actually mean for someone looking to buy a house?
So this applies to borrowers who need what's called high loan-to-value mortgage insurance. This means they are putting down less than 20% of the purchase price as a down payment. If you're looking at a home that costs over $1 million and you need that extra insurance, then there are certain down payment requirements you'll need to meet.
Can you walk us through those?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On the first $500,000 of the home's price, you'll need to put down 5%. For the portion of the price between $500,000 and $1.5 million, you'll need a 10% down payment.
Okay, so let's say I'm looking at a house for $1.2 million. Would I need to put down 20% on the whole thing?
Not with these new rules. You would only need to put down 5% on the first $500,000, which is $25,000. Then you'd need to put down 10% on the remaining $700,000, which works out to $70,000. That means your total down payment would be $95,000 instead of the $240,000 you would have needed under the old rules.
That's a pretty big difference. So with these longer amortization periods and the increased price cap, it seems like the government is really trying to help people break into the housing market. But is this actually going to make housing more affordable in Canada?
That's a great question, and it leads us into some of the most important considerations with these new reforms. It's not quite as simple as saying longer amortizations and higher price caps automatically equal more affordable housing.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Well, for starters, these changes don't address everything that affects affordability. We still need to think about things like interest rates, your overall financial health, and even what's happening in the local housing market.
Right, because a hot market can push prices up regardless of what the rules are. And interest rates have a huge impact on how much people can actually afford to borrow. What else should we be thinking about?
One of the biggest concerns with these mortgage reforms is that they might actually drive up demand, especially in the short term.
So it's like we're making it easier to buy a house, but there still aren't enough houses to go around.
Exactly. Think of it this way. Imagine there are 100 people who want to buy a house in a certain area, but there are only 50 houses for sale. If we suddenly make it easier for more people to qualify for a mortgage, we might end up with 150 people competing for those same 50 houses.
Which would likely push the prices up even further, making things less affordable for everyone. That's not what we want.
Right. So while these changes might seem beneficial on the surface, we need to be aware of the potential for unintended consequences. And that's why it's so crucial for you as a potential home buyer to do your research and really think about your individual situation.
So are you saying these reforms are a bad idea?
Not necessarily. They could definitely help some people achieve that dream of homeownership. For someone who's been struggling to save up a big enough down payment, this price cap increase could be a real game changer, and lower monthly payments could make homeownership more sustainable in the long run.
So it's not all dim and gloom.
Definitely not. But it's important to remember that these changes don't exist in a vacuum. We also need to consider other factors at play in the housing market, like the overall supply of homes, interest rates, and economic conditions.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. These reforms are just one piece of the puzzle. What else could the government do to actually make housing more affordable for Canadians?
That's a big question. And there are a lot of different opinions out there. Some experts argue that we need to focus on increasing the supply of affordable housing, maybe through incentives for developers, or by streamlining the approval processes for new construction projects.
So it's not just about helping people buy homes, it's also about making sure there are enough homes available in the first place.
Exactly. And then there are things like zoning regulations, which can sometimes restrict the type and density of housing that can be built in certain areas.
You've also mentioned interest rates a few times. How do those fit into all of this?
Well, even if you can afford a lower monthly payment, thanks to a longer amortization, if interest rates go up, that could still make the overall cost of your mortgage much higher.
So these reforms might help people get their foot in the door, but it doesn't necessarily mean they'll be able to comfortably stay there if interest rates start to climb.
That's right. And that's why it's so important for anyone considering buying a home to have a solid understanding of their own financial situation and to factor in potential changes in the market.
This all makes me think about that old saying, knowledge is power. The more you know about these changes, the better equipped you'll be to make a smart decision for your future.
Absolutely. Don't just rely on headlines or what you hear from friends and family. Do your research, read the fine print, and talk to financial experts who can help you understand the implications of these reforms for your specific goals.
Speaking of the fine print, is there anything else in this government document that we haven't talked about yet? Anything our listeners should be aware of?
There are a couple of important details tucked away in the Other Parameters section. First, these changes don't actually come into effect until December 15th, 2024. So there's still some time for buyers to prepare and for the market to react.
Okay, so we've got a little over a year before these new rules kick in. What's the other detail?
This one's pretty important. These new mortgage rules are only for properties that will be lived in by the buyer or a close relative.
So no buying investment properties with these new benefits.
That's right. It seems the government is trying to prioritize owner-occupied homes with these reforms.
Which makes sense considering their goal of making housing more affordable for Canadians. But I wonder if that will be enough to actually move the needle on affordability in the long run.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Ah.
And that brings us to another crucial consideration. What about those who are already struggling to afford housing in Canada?
Right. These reforms seem to be focused on helping people buy homes, but what about those who are already struggling to make ends meet? What about renters who are facing sky-high costs?
That's a really important point. And it highlights the need for a more holistic approach to housing affordability. We need solutions that address the needs of everyone, not just those who are looking to buy.
So we've talked about boosting supply, reforming zoning regulations, and even considering the impact of interest rates. What else could be done to help those who are struggling right now?
Well, there are a number of things. Expanding access to affordable rental units is crucial, as is providing support for those facing housing insecurity. We need to look at things like rent control measures, investments in social housing, and even innovative approaches like cooperative housing models.
So it's not just about mortgages and down payments, it's about creating a system where everyone has access to safe and affordable housing.
Exactly. And that's going to require a commitment from all levels of government, as well as collaboration with community organizations and the private sector.
It sounds like a huge challenge, but it's also an opportunity to rethink how we approach housing in Canada.
Absolutely. And by having these conversations, by exploring different perspectives and potential solutions, we can hopefully create a more equitable and sustainable housing future for everyone.
So let's bring this back to you, our listener. We've unpacked these new mortgage reforms and explored some of the bigger questions around housing affordability in Canada. What stands out to you? What are your thoughts on these changes and their potential impact?
We'd love to hear your perspective. What questions do you have? What concerns or hopes do you have about the future of housing in Canada?
Because at the end of the day, this is about more than just rules and regulations. It's about people's lives, their dreams, and their ability to access one of the most fundamental human needs, a place to call home. It really feels like these reforms have opened up a much bigger conversation about housing in Canada. It's not just about these specific changes, it's about how we create a system that works for everyone.
And what's fascinating to me is that these reforms highlight just how complex the housing market really is. There are so many factors at play, from interest rates and economic conditions to demographics and even social trends.
Right. We've been talking a lot about affordability, but what about the other side of the coin? What about those who are thinking of selling their homes? How might these reforms impact them?
That's a great point. If these reforms do lead to increased demand, as some predict, it could potentially drive up home values, which could be good news for sellers.
So a homeowner in, say, Calgary might see their home value increase because there are suddenly more buyers in the market.
That's one possibility. But of course, it's important to remember that real estate is hyperlocal. What happens in Calgary might be very different from what happens in Toronto or Vancouver.
So if you're thinking of selling your home, it's important to pay attention to what's happening in your specific market. These reforms could have a ripple effect, but it's not a guaranteed win for every seller.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to consult with a real estate professional who understands the nuances of your local market.
So we've got buyers who might benefit from easier access to mortgages, sellers who might see their home values increase, and a whole lot of uncertainty about how this will all play out in the long run. It's a lot to process.
It definitely is. And I think that's where critical thinking comes in. We need to move beyond just the headlines and really dig into the details, consider different perspectives, and ask tough questions.
Like, will these reforms truly make housing more affordable for the average Canadian, or will they just exacerbate existing inequalities?
Exactly. And what other measures can we take to address the root causes of the housing crisis, like the lack of affordable rental units and the challenges faced by those experiencing homelessness?
These are huge systemic issues that can't be solved by tweaking mortgage rules alone.
Absolutely. But I think this conversation is a step in the right direction. By shining a light on these issues, by engaging in open dialogue and exploring different solutions, we can hopefully create a more equitable and sustainable housing future for all Canadians.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Canadian mortgage reforms, we want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to ponder. Do you think these reforms will have a positive or negative impact on the Canadian housing market in the long term? And what other steps do you think are necessary to address the broader challenges of housing affordability and accessibility?
There are no easy answers, but we encourage you to continue exploring these questions, to engage in informed discussions, and to advocate for solutions that create a more just and equitable housing system for everyone.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and remember that the future of housing in Canada is something we can all shape together.